All right. So, oops, that's fine. No, it's still correct. But so, this week is week 6, Council of Saints and Icons. Yeah, on the left is previous, on the right is current and future. There you go. Yeah. So the reason that we want to talk about these councils is because they are the defining institution of the church, meaning whenever there's a question about something, we call a council and we talk about it. The ecumenical councils then, these 7, were when we had a really big question, and so the entire church was called. If you know anything about these already, you know that they tended to cover a variety of things, although they often focused on one particularly fast-growing heresy at the time. I promise I won't drill too much into each of these, but I think it is important to at least acknowledge a little bit of what they talked about and understand why they condemned what they did, especially because, as you may notice, if we go through some of these, some of the things that I'm calling heresies are not uncommon in Christian churches today. Not Orthodox churches, but you may run into some of these in modern times. They probably don't use the same words to describe themselves, but the theology is the same. So I think it's worth discussing for that reason alone. So, all right, starting at the first council. You'll notice it's pretty early, 325. This one was called because a priest named Arius was saying some weird stuff. So prior to this point, there was no defining creed. There was no universal understanding of exactly what the faith was in any singular thing anyway. Obviously, they knew enough to know that what he was saying was weird and not right, but not because they had any kind of summary of what they were doing. There were a few things like the Athanasian Creed is considered to be pretty early, so it's not to say that there weren't statements of faith. And we know, actually, that the creed that they come up with here was in part taken from some other statements that people had written. But there was nothing that had been universally agreed upon as, yes, this is what we all believe. Arianism specifically taught, or Arius specifically taught, that Jesus Christ was not God, to put it very simply. He was the greatest creation among all of creation, but still just creation, not God. Of note is that, at the time at least, they pretty much ran the services like we do today. So it wasn't that he was going off in his own direction liturgically. It wasn't that he was, pulling chunks out of the scriptures or something like that. He just had a different understanding of who Jesus was and therefore our relationship to him. And as I think you probably all know, that was condemned. Arianism is sometimes called the arch heresy. It took quite a while for it to be fully stamped out, and as I've mentioned before at the beginning, it's one of those that is come back in modern times in certain groups that I don't think there's any reason to name, but you may or may not know of which ones I'm talking about. So Arianism is a very strongly despised heresy of the church because it is so early in the life and was so far-flung in its spread. The next council revised the Nicene Creed into what we say today. For those of you that aren't aware, we sing the Creed every liturgy. It is in our the prayer books that people take home. Usually it's somewhere in either morning or evening prayers. The expectation is that you say it pretty regularly. If you all come into the church, I will make you at some point recite the creed, probably. So this is the creed from that second council. You can go find the first one if you are curious. It's a little different, but not wildly different. Mostly they just bulked up some of the language to make it very clear exactly who Jesus is. And if you note the years, it was not that far apart from the first one. So as you can imagine, though Arianism was officially condemned in this first council, it really didn't go away, and that's why they had to call it the second council, to confirm that yes, indeed, that we really did mean it the first time, and we're going to add some additional language to the creed to make it even clearer what we meant. The next council is the Council of Ephesus, which repudiated Nestorianism, which proclaimed that the Virgin Mary could not have conceived, proclaimed the Virgin Mary as the Mother of God. That is wrong. I think I updated this, and this must be an old handout. The council proclaimed the Virgin Mary as the Mother of God. Nestorius, wanted to call the Mother of God the Mother of Christ. In effect, Nestorius had a really hard time acknowledging that God became a human infant. So it's a little weird, I think, in modern days because we don't really have anything quite like this, but he effectively said that there was an infant, and then at some point later, that infant has God come over him. Like some of these, there's some variation in exactly when you look at it and exactly where you try and pin down the beliefs. It can vary a little bit, but very generally, his big thing was to, instead of saying Theotokos, God-bearer, he wanted Christotokos, Christ-bearer, and to try and make that distinguishing difference between God as a baby, which he could not accept, and a human baby that did good things. If you remember way back to the beginning, or if you look at the handouts if you didn't get one, in week 1 I gave on the back of the handout a little timeline of the church, and it showed some of the different splits. This is the first split, the Council of Ephesus. There is to this day, I believe it is the Assyrian Church of the East, that holds on to Nestorianism, and they number him among their saints, which means they reject all of the subsequent councils here that we'll go over in a moment. They're not very large. I imagine probably none of you have heard of them. I don't know, maybe if you've done enough internet diving, but Nestorian Church of the East. They are, as the name implies, Nestorian. Or sometimes I think Assyrian Church of the East as well, but same, yeah. They do not agree with the Council of Ephesus and split because of that. The next one, Chalcedon, is another time that we see a big split. So if you ever see churches that are Coptic or Indian or what are some of the other ones? Ethiopian. There's a handful more. I'm blanking on them now. Coptic is Egyptian. No, the Assyrians were previous. These all reject the Council of Chalcedon, and which is why they're sometimes called non-Chalcedonian. So this is the council that they split from. The heresy this covered was monophysitism, which, again, it's a little complex, but to summarize it as succinctly as I can, the difference is that we say, and what the council affirmed, is that Jesus had two fully formed natures, human and divine, in one person. We say in our hymns, you've probably heard us talking about him being fully divine and fully human. That is because of this council. The non-Chalcedonian formula says that his humanity and divinity is mixed in a single nature. So you will sometimes again hear in our hymnography two natures neither mixed nor commingled. Again, specifically targeting that heresy. It is very important for us. So the reason this matters, as with all of the previous ones, so all of these first three or so heresies are all attacking Christ and his divinity in one form or another. The reason that this is problematic is because if Christ is not fully divine, then he cannot affect our salvation any more than any one of us here can. So Arianism is out, just for the same reason that I can't point my finger at any of you and say, save us all, the entire earth, right? I know I certainly can't do that. I hope you all understand you can't do that either. Nestorianism just kind of confuses what Jesus was. It led, I didn't talk about this much, but it led to some other kind of weird forms later, where, for example, Jesus the man has Christ the angel come on him, and And then they've got this weird idea of on the cross, when he calls out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? They don't understand that that's quoting a psalm, and instead they say that that's when the angel leaves the man on the cross, because obviously God couldn't die, so the human dies in his place. Again, if God doesn't do the saving acts fully in his divinity, then we can't, it's not saving. There was no power in it. Conversely, though, and what we see with the monophysitism is that by removing the distinct humanity and divinity, it makes his humanity different than ours. I have no divinity mixed into my humanity. I'm only human, just like all of you, I presume. And so, if Christ was indeed a mixture of both human and divine, and not fully both independently, then the only people he saved are those who have a mixed nature of human and divine, of which he's the only one. So, not very effective for the rest of us. Which is why we hold very strongly to an understanding, as from these first four councils, that God became man, putting on humanity, but retaining his full divinity, being both fully man and fully God, and in doing so went through the entire, everything you read about in the Gospels, including his death, including his resurrection, including his ascension into heaven, all of that as fully divine and fully human. Does that all make sense? I see nodding heads. Good. All right. Moving on. The fifth council more or less reaffirmed the previous councils and explicitly stated some things, including condemning some new writings for Arianism, Nestorianism, and monophysitism. The sixth council then repudiated monothelitism, which affirmed that Christ had both a human and divine will. Monothelitism says that he had, as the mono implies, he had only one. Again, different groups, different times, some different interpretations. I don't think anyone tries to claim he is only human, but there are those that say he had only a divine will, or that he had some kind of mixed will, similar to monophysitism. In having a fully human and fully divine nature, as we say, that means he must have had a fully divine and fully human will as well. Does that make sense? These are rather complex and long theological discussions. There's lots of writing out there, so I'm trying very hard to not spend all day talking about one of them. Yes?
Well, which group was it that thought that it was like some kind of hologram?
Yeah, that was kind of a branch off down the road of Nestorianism-ish. It's not truly Nestorianism, but it kind of comes out of that idea that God couldn't have been human, God cannot die, therefore something else must have happened. And yeah, one of them was, among the many others, was that it was some kind of vision or hologram or something like that. I don't think they would have used that particular word, but yeah. All right. There is a kind of middle council, the Quintisext or council, or sometimes called the Council of Trullo, which didn't do a whole lot of things on its own right, which is why it isn't really numbered among the ecumenical councils, but if you're reading, you may run into stuff by it, because mostly what it did was summarized the previous councils, including the Sixth Council, and just made things clearer. So it's often kind of considered an extension of the Sixth Ecumenical Council, because that's where the writings from the Sixth actually come from, is in that one, the Council of Trullo. Sorry, one more thing I should have said at the beginning. I've put here the names, First Council of Nicaea, First Council of Constantinople. I will never use those, beyond reading it right here for you, because it's confusing for no reason at all, when I could just say the Fourth Council, and the Fifth Council, and the Sixth Council, and that makes it way clearer which one we're talking about in the order of them than trying to remember which one the Second Council of Constantinople is. If you know them by those names, wonderful. It's not wrong to use them or anything. I just don't think it's necessarily the most important thing to remember which council was where and how many there were in that particular city. More important is to know that there were 1 through 7 and a vague idea of the types of things they discussed in them. So, all right. The last one then is the Council of Nicaea, the Second Council of Nicaea, or again the Seventh Council, which restored the veneration of icons. So this is what we just celebrated this last weekend. It's the triumph of Orthodoxy. There was a lot of debate in the empire at this time around whether or not the usage of icons was acceptable. There's a few different speculations as to why. One of them that seems reasonable enough to me is that the Muslim armies were starting to move and take over Byzantine lands, and there was some thought amongst some of the rulers maybe that if they took away icons, that might make Christianity a little more palatable and maybe give them a slightly more favorable outcome in those cities where they were losing. Didn't work. And then they held a council and they said, no, actually, icons are very important. And in this council, this is where we get to the distinction through the writings of several saints that were confirmed in the council about the difference between veneration and worship. So you will hear us talk about how we venerate icons, but we worship only God. And this is where you'll find quotes like saying that we do not worship the wood and the paint of icons. Icons are wonderful things, but it is not the rectangle with the paint on it that is the important thing. It's the people depicted in them that are important. And so we venerate the icon, meaning the person in the icon. The veneration passes to the prototype, is another phrase you'll hear come out of this council. And that it really isn't anything to do with the image itself. Again, not the wood and the paint. We don't care about that. It's the people made in the image and likeness of God that matter. And the saints are just those people that have allowed that image and likeness to shine brightly. And by venerating them, by honoring them, we give honor to the person that they allowed to shine brightly in their lives, which is Christ, which is God. Right? So by honoring, by venerating the saints, we are acknowledging God's power. We are not worshiping those people because worship is due only to God. I will say, I think part of the reason, if you've personally struggled with this a little bit, or if you've run into people that have online or in person that struggle with this, I think one of the biggest reasons for that today is that it is not very common in churches to actually worship, I would argue. That most of what you see in Protestant churches we would call more like veneration, and then that's all that they do. Whereas it is a very integral part of our services to fall down and worship before the Lord, which you saw us do multiple times in the Vesper service we just did. It is part of our service to worship. And I think it is clear then seeing that to understand what veneration is, which is not that. Does that all make sense? Good. All right. So the other important note here is that the ecumenical councils, these 7, are basically just larger versions of smaller local councils. I said that at the beginning. We continue to do these smaller councils to this day. I don't know if any of you were aware of it, but I spent about a week earlier this year going to both a local council for the Diocese of the West that we are in, and before that slightly, a council for the entire OCA, where all of the bishops from across the OCA came together and we talked about different things. So we do this all the time, just because some people like to claim that we cannot have another ecumenical council because the Bishop of Rome left. No, we've just not really had any reason to. There hasn't been anything that's come up that quite rises to the level of these 7. As you can see, the first few were very specifically targeting Christ's divinity, and then we have the monophysitism and monothelitism, which confused his divinity and humanity, and the last one, the iconoclasm, arguably was a confusion of his humanity, of God putting on flesh. We haven't really had any concerns like that in the church since then. So while we continue to have councils, none of them have been ecumenical in nature. We've had some very important, some larger councils, but none of them that we number among the 7. Does that all make sense? Good. All right. Wonderful. So as I said, these councils largely confirm who Christ is, and more specifically, our relationship with him and his relationship with creation. So very foundational elements of the faith. If we can't agree on those, then it would seem to me that we do not share the same faith. And that is the reason that we are not in communion anymore with the non-Chalcedonian, the Copts, and the Indian churches, and the Ethiopian churches, and the Assyrian churches, and whatnot. Do we not have any more of week 6 over there?
I can find it.
Okay, well, I'll give you mine when I'm done. Okay. So it is precisely because Jesus, the Christ, as fully human and fully divine, did all of the saving things that he did, that we can be saved. He is the link between humanity and divinity. He took his humanity from the Theotokos, taking flesh from her. And we know that he created all of creation to be good, right? That's what it says in Genesis. All of creation is good. He lived, died, ascended in our flesh, and because he did it in our flesh, we can follow after him. We can also die, we can also be crucified, and we can also ascend with him. So therefore Christ is the foundation of our theology on saints and icons. I do also want to very quickly point out here, so the use of icons is not a Christian thing, meaning we didn't invent it. This is something that predates Christianity by a good while. If you remember back to our class on Judaic roots, it was very common in the Jewish world to adorn the walls of the temple with images from the Old Testament, with images of vines and animals and things like that. People going to the temple would have expected to see the walls adorned with images, not for them to be plain and white. So when Christianity begins, the usage of icons is the natural continuation of what we'd already been doing. Now it takes on a new light, as everything does in Christ, but ultimately it isn't some wildly new thing that Christians are doing. Which is why the confirmation in, yes?
When you said that the previous temples had icons,
Mm-hmm.
are you referring to like what were pagan temples, or referring to Jewish?
Jewish. The Jewish temple had iconographic images all over the inside. Yep. Although actually the synagogues often did too. I know some of you younger people maybe haven't seen this, but you may be familiar with the Fiddler on the Roof movie. There's a scene in there when they are in the synagogue, and it shows the walls of the synagogue being covered in images, floor to ceiling.
I haven't seen that, but
All right, well.
So in the Roman temples and the
Roman temples also would have, to a lesser extent, but because they would have like their Romans and stuff, they painted their statues, for example, but no, I'm specifically talking about in the Judaic tradition. All right, we already talked about worship and veneration. Again, just to really drive this home, the saints and icons don't replace God. So when we pray in front of saints, we're not praying to them and not to God, which I hope has been obvious through everything you've seen so far. Those of you that have been coming to services for a little while, I hope you understand, having seen this, that we are worshiping God alone, but with the witness of the saints around us. When we venerate the icons before services, or during or after, we're not doing that to the exclusion of God. We can do both. We can show proper veneration to those that are worthy of it, and also proper worship for the one and only person who is worthy to be worshipped. They, of course, stand as intercessors before the throne of God. So when we pray to a saint, again, we're not praying to them and not to God. Just we sometimes use the image of if you're drowning in a lake or river or wherever you're drowning, you're not going to just call out to God exclusively if someone is standing right there with a life preserver, right? You're going to call out to that person, and the language you're probably going to use is, help, save me, throw something to me, right? You're not asking them for eternal salvation, right? I mean, I hope not in that moment. I hope you're asking for them to throw you the thing so you can get out of the water. So we inherently have this understanding that we can ask other people to save us in a way that isn't eternal salvation. When we pray to saints, we are not asking for them to be the agent of our salvation. We are asking for them to help and assist us in our salvation, in their role as intercessors before the throne of God. Some saints are particularly known for having more of an ear for people with a certain type of struggle or something like that. So you'll sometimes hear people say, oh, you're struggling with this thing, pray to this saint or that saint. But if you don't feel comfortable with that, you can always just pray to God. It's not some requirement, because ultimately, no matter what we are doing, we are always worshiping God. Right? Good. We put icons in our churches, our homes, our cars, our place of work. You will see icons everywhere. If you, I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to go to someone else's house blessing. If there's one that's public next year, try to go to one. And you'll see people will have icons everywhere. Some people like to have their cars blessed, so you may see icons hanging in people's cars. We've kind of put them all over the place. Why? Because by doing so, we make sure that no matter what we're doing through the day, we are reminded of what we're actually called to do. The other reason people like, a particular saint is because they connect with the story. They see maybe some of themselves in that saint, and by putting their image around, it reminds them that we need to do the same thing. The saints are our examples to follow. They are the ones that show us what we need to do. I often tell people to read their lives because it is helpful to see people that have gone through the same struggle as we do. People that lived in the world, that had sometimes pretty normal jobs, and yet made the right decisions and got to the right place in the end. So that's why the saints are important, because they are examples. They're the people that will lead us if we follow them anyway. All right. I think that's pretty much all I have. I do put the entire text of the Nicene Constantinopolitan, as it's sometimes called, the form of the creed that we use in our services here on the back. So if you are unfamiliar with it, you can read it there. And I've given a very brief definition of some of the heresies there as well. So I hope that's helpful. I'll turn it over to you all for questions now. All at once. Yes.
Can you speak a little bit to the idea of blessing things like objects such as cars, homes?
Sure. Is there something specific?
I guess where it
or-
comes from and sort of the significance of it.
Have you ever read the Psalms?
Yeah.
Okay. So I suppose just to reiterate the question was, why do we bless things? Where does that come from? If you read the Psalms, there's a lot of calling on things to be blessed, on blessing other people. So this is not a Christian thing. This comes from the Judaic practice long before. We've just continued it. It is a pretty common understanding. Jacob and Esau, right? Getting a blessing. It's a pretty integral part of the Judaic and, by extension, Christian practice to bless people and things. The basic understanding is we live in a fallen, broken world, right? The fall of Adam and Eve was not just their own, but as we sing in some of our hymns, all of creation fell with them. And so while we know that God created everything good, we also know that there are thorns and brambles and other things that have sprung up to make our lives hard. So we bless things to try and ward off the evil that we know we are prone to fall to. It's not that God is incapable of overcoming these things on his own. It's that we don't want to. It's that we are very bad at doing what we know we have to do. And hopefully by remembering that this thing has been blessed, it puts us in a better state of mind. Drives out whatever evil. We do understand that there are agents of evil. Before we do a baptism, for example, we do an exorcism of the wanderers. And one of the things the priest says, which you'll hear me quote a number of times in these catechetical classes, is the priest says, may all adverse powers be crushed beneath the sign of the image of the cross. Hopefully ensuring that the baptism is effective and long-lasting, and a baptism for the right things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Other questions? Yeah.
I've heard that blessings, like health blessings, have to be done more than once. I heard Father Stephen Young say that one time because he said something like.
Yeah, we do them every year.
Every year. Is there a reason to that timeline? Or?
You going to remember something that you did 5 years ago?
No.
Not very well. I mean, you'll probably remember that it happened, but not super well. Yeah, so we do it on a regular basis. Why do we go to liturgy every week? Why do you pray every day? We're creatures of habit, and that habit helps give us structure, helps us remember to do the things that are important in our life. So by doing these things on the regular, once a year in the case of house blessings or car blessings or that kind of thing, it helps keep it, frequently in our mind, remembering that this is a thing, that this has been blessed, that we're supposed to treat it differently because of that. Also because, like I said before, we're really bad at doing good things and we tend to invite evil. So I'm sure all of you have, if you have been trying to follow the fast so far, I'm sure you have all struggled, and I'm sure somewhere in your mind you know that all you need to do is just not eat the wrong things, or just say your prayers like you're supposed to, and yet sometimes that's really hard, isn't it? Even though intellectually you know what you need to do, it's just hard to make those right decisions all the time. So we do these things repeatedly so that it becomes ingrained in us, so that it becomes just a natural part of what we are. So that, in a sense, as Paul writes, we can pray without ceasing. Part of the way we do that is by bringing the church into our life as much as we possibly can. So we hammer these things again and again and again and again and again in hopes that eventually it gets through our thick skulls. Mine included. Yes?
The Orthodox Church have a stance on like the Catholic Church relics, like the crown of thorns that's supposedly was on Notre Dame.
The short answer is not really. The long answer is those things existed, so they certainly could. There's several claims to what I would call like iconic relics. Maybe not, I don't know. Just because you possess something doesn't necessarily mean anything. The Muslims stole a bunch of our relics as well every time they took over places. Doesn't make them any better.
Well, I guess my question is, let's say if you visit the Vatican or something.
Oh yes, it is pretty normal. In fact, I've heard from people that have gone to the Vatican specifically to venerate relics that oftentimes the lines are short because most people aren't there for that. Most people are there for other things. So if you're the one going around to all the different places and venerating the relics, oftentimes there's not many other people doing that.
So there's no
Yeah.
issue.
No. I mean, we would make a distinction between post-schism saints, relics of post-schism saints, but sure, any they've got multiple relics of different apostles and whatnot, so sure, yeah, go venerate them if you can. Other questions?
Do you know when modalism is that part of Arianism or Nestorianism?
Modalism, it wasn't one of the ones that was quite as clearly. So again, there's only so much I can cover in these. So I tried to highlight some of the most erroneous and combated heresies that were talked about in these. It's certainly not to imply that this is the exhaustive list of everything that was covered in these. Yeah, there's a wide variety of other heresies that were talked about. Do you have a specific question about modalism, or just curious as to where it fits in? Yeah.
Honestly, maybe 3 years ago, when I started reading the Bible, that's how I kind of saw the Trinity. It's like sort of like God dwelled in Christ, Christ was God, but he wasn't like fully human. But now I understand it all. I was just kind of wondering.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so Arianism was not like that, because it was very clear. He's just a creation, a really good creation, sort of effectively the way we would describe the Theotokos. A really good creation, but still just creation. But Nestorius and the subsequent heresies, monothelitism and monophysitism, both acknowledge to some extent a divinity in Jesus, but the question is just how. And those that kind of spring out of Nestorianism tended to be kind of like you mentioned with the hologram one, some form of there's a dude, and then something godlike happened to him, but he's still just a dude, but like doing God things. So yeah, there's a bunch of them that come out of that. But yes,
I think that you were making a very important point, and I'm not sure that I heard exactly what it was, so I just want to
okay.
confirm. And I think that you said the Council of Ephesus was the ultimate council that set into written form exactly what the Christian Church believes. Is that what you said?
No, all of the councils do that in one way or another.
Okay,
So,
okay.
Well, let me just add to that really quick because it is an important thing to understand. So, what you see is that before the councils, as we talked about last week, remember talking about the hierarchy, each bishop would have put forward what was proper and acceptable within their own diocese. But there wasn't any necessarily, shall we say, international coordination between them until these councils. These councils were the time when the entire church came together and said, okay, wait a minute, this thing, that's not okay. And so then defined stuff to try and make it very clear, okay, we're not that, this is what we are. And then another thing popped up and they said, wait, no, we're not that either. And so then they define, okay, this is what we are. So all of these councils in their own right, in some form or fashion, are defining very clearly, at least as opposed to that thing, what the church is and is not.
Is the Council of Ephesus before or after the Nicene Creed?
It's after. So if you have here the first council formed what is similar to, but not the complete creed as we know it today. The second council finalized it into the form that I have on the back here. The Council of Ephesus then is the third council, which came after that.
Has there been anything of note that has happened since the Council of Ephesus where the Christian church in general, the true Christian church, has said, well, there's just a few little points or something on there we still need to clarify, or is that...
With the creed? Or...
With any of those from 1,000 years ago or whatever?
I mean, each of the subsequent councils, the fourth, the Council of Chalcedon, and subsequent ones, all respond to heresies and so clarify things. None of them change the creed, though. That has remained constant.
It's very interesting to me because, I've been going to church all my life, but I've heard of the Nicene Creed and the Athanasian Creed.
Sorry, Athanasian Creed. That's the one that I meant to reference earlier.
Yeah, the other ones I hadn't heard of. Okay, some of the pastors nowadays say, well, we moved beyond the Nicene Creed, blah, blah, blah.
If Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever, then there is no moving past. It either is true or it is not. Yes.
Maybe he's trying to ask, which council did they stop allowing people to add or take away? Was that the third council, or? So how, you know how the Catholic Church added the filioque? Wasn't there a point before that they said you can't touch this creed, change it at all?
Yes, the Catholic Church was one of the most vehemently opposed to the filioque from its inception. And it wasn't until Charlemagne came to power and was in favor of it that Rome decided maybe they can be cool with it because Charlemagne is cool with it. So it's not really a council thing. It's just a power thing. Yeah. Yep.
In Vatican I, Vatican II, that's councils for the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they make a big point about doing ecumenical councils quite regularly, but we don't really see any point to. Again, I want to be very clear. It's not that things are set in stone and can never change. The question is just, why would it be changing? What is the necessary change to be put forward? And, for example, the First and Second Vatican made some pretty major liturgical changes. Well, in our eyes, that's not an ecumenical council. That's a local council. An ecumenical council defines broad strokes of what the faith is. The particular liturgical practices of this church or that church, that's not something that would need to be defined on an ecumenical level. because there are different rites. Even within the Catholic world, there's a bunch of different rites between the different groups that are under Rome. So why that would be elevated to ecumenical status doesn't really make a lot of sense to us. Of course, there were other things in some of those that stating specific dogma or identifying certain pieces of theology as being dogma. But again, for us, the approach is always more defensive. If there is a need to make a change, then we will come together and make a change. If not, then why fix what isn't broken? And quite frankly, again, there just hasn't been any reason to call another ecumenical council. We could. In fact, there have been several times where people have tried because they felt there was something that was important. And ultimately, a bunch of bishops from around the world said, yeah, I don't really think that's an important thing to go to, and didn't. So it's not that we can't do an ecumenical council, it's just that we haven't had any reason to. And the few times that it's been tried, we've more or less decided, yeah, no, actually, that's not a big enough deal. So we certainly could. Could be one in a few years or something if something came up that needed to be addressed. But so far, we haven't found anything.
Like if, just for example, like us in the OCA, like they started doing something kind of
Sure.
different than the other,
Yep.
council forum.
Yeah, if there was something weird happening in some part of the world, then probably we'd have to come together and try and figure out what's going on and ask people why they're doing that weird thing and determine if it is a good thing or not so good. And yep, it could very well rise to the level of ecumenical.
Does the Orthodox Church believe that like certain relics can like have cause? I know there's miracle relics like the myrrh, but in terms of like healing powers.
Sure. When God so wills, even the order of nature is overturned. So, absolutely yes. Relics from people that have done a good job of allowing the image and likeness of Christ to shine within them. Those relics can and frequently do have miracles associated with them. It's a pretty common occurrence in the church. Yeah. Whether it's a myrrh gushing icon like the Ividon icon that travels around from Hawaii, or the relic from some saint or other, hand of St. John, or I don't know, skull of some saint or other. It's pretty common.
I have a question about this, about Vespers that we just did.
Sure.
It's okay, but when you pray, or we pray, like, grant me not a spirit of sloth,
Mm-hmm.
like, I think I know what sloth means, what does that mean, like, not being, like, lazy, pretty much?
Yep.
Okay,
Sloths aren't known for doing things energetically.
okay.
Are patron saints chosen by like Orthodox Baptist Christians that sort of speak to them?
Yeah, if you are wanting to become Orthodox at some point in the future, I will ask you to find a sponsor, someone within the parish that you know and connect with. They will vouch for you, and to pick a patron saint, someone that you connect with, that you like, whose story resonates with you. I often recommend that you not pick someone too weird. Barsanufius is a wonderful saint. Galaction, wonderful saints. I don't really want to have to call any of you Galaction or Barsanufius. So, especially if you already have perfectly functional Christian names.
Yeah, so when you pick your patron saint, your church, your Christian name becomes that saint's name, even if you already have a Christian name.
Yep. If you come in off the street with your parents having named you Luke and you decide you want to be John, I will call you John. I will commune you as John. I will give you confession as John. Yep.
And is name? Go ahead. You go ahead. Is name's day?
It's the feast of the saint that you picked. So my saint, Saint Damien, Cosmas and Damien, unmercenary healers, their feast day is November 1st. So my name's day is November 1st.
So it's not the day you were named.
Correct. It's the feast of the person you were named after. Yep.
What happens if you pick a saint but still have the Christian name? Can you still use
So, I mean, legally you're going to be whatever you are,
Yeah.
unless you go through the paperwork to change it, which you could do. But, yeah, within the life of the church, you will be referred to as whatever the new name is. So that's why I generally recommend not picking a weird one, and really, honestly, not picking one different than the name you already have, or a middle name maybe, or something like that, if you have perfectly fine names. Again, Mamas, another great saint. Please don't pick Mamas.
So like, can you pick, I know the idea is to pick one that you connect with and everything. but
You
what
can
if
pick
just want-
any saint you like.
I know, but what if you just want to be called by your real name? So like, for example, I'll just pick the prophet Nathan.
Fine,
So
great.
I wanna be called Nathan, but I don't really, I just kind of like,
There are other saints
'cause I like
called Nathan, so you can also look at other saints named Nathan, and maybe one of them will speak to you. If you like another saint, have their icon in their corner. That's fine. A number of saints I like too, but only one of them I call myself. So,
What exactly is a Christian name?
a name of someone that is on the walls. Yeah, we take the names of saints before us. So, like I mentioned before, Saints Cosmas and Damian on mercenary healers of Asia Minor. My parents liked them, so I was given that name at birth, and that's what I still have. Luke, John, I mean, there's lots of good Christian names out there. Catherine, that are pretty normal in today's world, that lots of people have. Phoebe, I don't know, lots of good names. So lots of people coming off the street with a name that is already the name of a saint. So it would just be picking one of the probably multiple saints that share that name that you like, and your name's day would be the feast for whichever one that is. So like I said before, yes, Prophet Nathan, but there are almost certainly other saints named Nathan. You could read some of their lives and see if any of them jump out at you.
I think like Christian name kind of need more biblical names, I guess. 'Cause like Bob is not a biblical name.
Sure, yeah,
That's kind of.
yes. But it doesn't need to be an Old Testament or New Testament figure specifically. For example, there are plenty of saints whose names we take that came way later. So it doesn't have to be a New Old Testament name.
So, for icons,
Uh-huh.
is there a specific order of where icons are to be placed in the front and then on the walls?
That's a very good question. Where do we put icons in, or where and why do we put icons in churches? So, yes, we talked a little bit when we did the tour originally about the iconostas. Those are, every church will have something very similar to that, with the exception of we have St. Christine up there. Whatever church you're named after will be up there in her place. Around the walls, there is an order, both from top to bottom and back to front. It's rare that one is able to actually follow that order. For example, here in this space, being a converted space, we've just collected what we can, and a lot of these icons came from people donating them, not from an explicit, church acquisition of them. So we put up what we have. In the case that you have a temple that is purpose-built to be an Orthodox church and you are paying people to put frescoes on the walls, then you can follow all of this goes there kind of thing. But a lot of times for a lot of churches, many churches in the U.S. today, you end up just putting up the icons you have in a way that kind of makes sense. So, for example, we put all of our North American saints there. We put, there's some choir saints behind the choir. The one in the middle is always whatever is being celebrated that day, so feast or saint. And then the other stands are usually either mirrors of what's on the iconostas, so that's why Christ and the Theotokos are there, or just other important icons that you have. So both of our two icons with relics in them are up front, and then the one of St. Nicholas, because he's well loved by a lot of people. So.
And to venerate, do you have to be Orthodox?
Nope. You will see people, Orthodox or not, making the sign of the cross twice, kissing, and then a third time after, because we like to do things in threes. Or on certain days, like before the cross, or certain specific icons of Christ, doing full prostrations in front of them. But again, it's all in threes because we like threes. Yes?
This is not important, okay, but
No worries.
I'm sure that 99% of the saints, we don't know exactly what they look like. And so it was an artist's conception. But what I'm wondering is, whoever made the first icon of, say, St. Paul or whatever, do the subsequent artists try to kind of mimic that so that you can probably tell who the saint is?
Who painted the first icon of the Theotokos?
Yeah, I'm just curious if
Do any of you know?
St. Luke the Evangelist.
St. Luke the Evangelist. As in that Luke. Right. So, I mean, he knew her. He talked to her. He certainly knew what she looked like. So, do subsequent artists follow? Yes, absolutely. There are some general guidelines. So, for example, Paul is usually depicted with, do we have a good clear icon of him somewhere? He's usually depicted with a receding hairline because that was used in Byzantine times to show wisdom. So there are certain elements of the icons that may be dramatized a little bit. But generally speaking, like if you look at the icon of St. John right there of San Francisco and you look at a picture of him, they look the same. A little bit different, but you know.
You probably know most of them then, even if it's one you've never seen before.
What do you mean?
I mean, if somebody comes in with a portrait of Saint whoever,
Yeah.
and you don't know who the artist was, but you know that it's a
Oh.
portrait you've never seen, but you still, that looks like it probably Saint Mark.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. If you look through history, I mean, with regional variation of styles, obviously being accounted for, there are some very consistent elements. So, for example, the three hierarchs icon that we have in the middle there, of that selection there on the wall, even looking back at very ancient icons of those three, they are all depicted with beards in the same style, which it's just very consistent and seems reasonable to think that they probably had beards that look like that, given that they all pretty much depict them that way. So yes, even though I may not know a particular saint personally, if you see enough icons of them, they'll pretty much look the same in all of them. You can also usually just read the text. So, you know, that one of St. John says St. John of Shanghai and San Francisco above it. So that's a little bit of a giveaway too.
Can anyone draw icons?
Nope. Like with many things in the Orthodox Church, you must receive a blessing to be allowed to do that, and have a lot of training. So, if that is something you're interested in, that's certainly something you can do, but it does take a lot of training. But yeah. I mean, to be clear, for yourself, yes, absolutely. If you look at the price tag on something and you can't justify that and you're a good artist, sure, for yourself in your own home, wonderful. To put in our bookstore here or put on our walls, that would be something that only someone who's been given an explicit blessing to do so would be allowed to do. But again, within your own homes, that doesn't really apply. So.
Does it matter where you buy an icon? Like go on Amazon and buy 20 pack?
To my knowledge, you can't really do that, because they're not made like that, with the exception of prints. So you can buy prints in bulk if you wanted, but that would mean that someone painted an icon and then they took a very high quality picture or scan of it and printed it off. So it's still a real icon, so to speak. It's just been printed. But remember what we said before in the 7th Council about icons. Is it the wood and the paint that matters? No, it's the image. So if any of you are familiar, I mentioned before the Iviron icon out of Hawaii that is known for gushing myrrh nonstop. That's a print. It's not the original. It's a print of the icon. It's just a sheet of paper in there. Yep. To answer the other question, though, there are a few places that are somewhat dubious in that they're either not Orthodox or that's in question. And so you can find iconographic depictions of all sorts of people. That doesn't make it good icon. So, I mean, basically anything you'll find at a church bookstore, probably good. If you are curious, I can certainly point you in the right direction. I think if you do your own search, pretty much everything you'll find is probably fine.
Do you have to get your icon blessed before you
Nope. No, that is a common thing people think, but remember, it's not the wood and the paint; it's the person they're depicting. So, yep, they are good because of the image on them, not because of the physical thing. I will certainly do blessings on your icons if you like. It is a very common practice, and it's pretty regular that people bring me icons to bless. So I will absolutely do it, but it is not a requirement.
And when did you say that people will do full prostrations to icons?
Before the cross. So we'll do that in, 2 weeks, I think? We'll have the cross out on Sunday. That's the next time anyway. And the icon that I had out last week, where Christ is crowned and dressed as a king when they were mocking him. Sometimes that icon is called extreme humility. Also, sometimes you'll see, like on the feast day of a saint, when their relics are out, people might do prostrations in front of that. Trying to think if there's any other times. It's never really wrong, but it's usually just more than you need to do. But
I'm not trying to hate on the Catholics, but I feel like sometimes, I don't know, because I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but there was like a video of, I forgot who it was, but like the lady was crying and like prostrating in front of her. Is that like is there a line to be like, okay, you kind of, I know it's not worship, I guess.
so it's a pretty common occurrence to read in the life of a saint that they had some life-changing experience, prayer answered, something like that, when they went into a church and prostrated in front of an icon and prayed there for a while. So, no, it's not wrong. Prostrating is not an inherently a worship thing per se, because we prostrate in front of each other for forgiveness vespers as well, right? I'm not worshiping every member of the community when we go around and ask forgiveness from one another. But it's more the involvement of the whole body in prayer that I was trying to get at there with the prostration. It's usually a sign of humility to be prostrating. How are we doing for time? I have no idea. Oh, okay, that's time. Well, any final questions before we call it a night? I do want to reiterate that though we have topics we talk about every night, you don't have to, as you maybe have guessed, limit questions to just the things we've talked about. I try and leave plenty of time to answer any questions you have. So if you read something in the last week, if you saw something online, if something we sang or read in one of the prayers jumped out at you or whatever, please feel free to ask. All right. Well, if that's everything, then I'll see you all next week, probably before. All right. Yeah, thank you.